In my last Diablo 4 video, I explained that, of all classes, the rogue was best at dying. This leads me to today's experiment. Sources across the web suggest all kinds of builds to compensate for the rogue's general inability to stay alive for extended periods of time. In particular, GameRant suggests 6 strategies that I'm going to rank from best to worst. If a game journalist can genuinely make me better at video games, I'll never play again. I've platinumed several difficult games, including Hyperlight Drifter, Salt and Sanctuary, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. In terms of ARPGs, I'm a Diablo 3 veteran and PoE dabbler who's enjoyed the absolute bejesus out of Titan Quest, which is basically Diablo 2.5 with Greek, Egyptian, and Norse mythology in it. Here's how I'll work my way through these builds. If I were to follow each build to a T, making this video would be a complete nightmare, but I present a reasonable compromise. Prizing base damage and resource generation, my Paragon point distribution suits any build, so we needn't worry much about it. We needn't worry about gear for similar reasons. With item power, Diablo 4 reduces every piece of gear to a single objective rating. At the time of recording, the maximum possible item power is 950. That is 925 plus 25 from upgrades. All of my gear is at this cap, allowing me to enjoy a substantial dexterity bonus. GameRant suggests no specific gem combinations, so I assume my gems are fine. If you must know, they prize defense. Otherwise, I'll assign all skill points as GameRant suggests. After assigning points, I'll test the build on local monsters for about 20 minutes, then I'll rank it relative to builds I've already tested. Without further ado. Our moves are Puncture, which allows you to throw blades for modest damage, Barrage, a slightly stronger move that relies on the bow for greater range, Smoke Grenade, which dazes enemies enough for them to be more vulnerable to attacks, Concealment, which grants invisibility for a short time, Shadow Imbuement, which bolsters your next 2 imbuable attacks with shadow damage, and Shadow Clone, which summons an apparition to fight for you. Passives bolster a bit of everything, but there's a particular emphasis on defense, as well as making Shadow Imbuement more devastating. So this doesn't look too good, but we'll give it a shot. Right off the bat, chugging several health potions couldn't keep me alive for more than 30 seconds, but I wanted to be fair and give myself some time to acclimate to the build. Concealment was my primary frustration with this strategy. More generally, too much of an investment in defense appeared to keep DPS from being high enough to put enemies at bay. The Smoke Grenade was more helpful than I thought it'd be. I always appreciate opportunities to bolster base damage with crowd control. A lot of the time, crowd control can be more valuable than base damage, especially if you're worried about AoE or being overrun. If I were to borrow anything from this build, I'd probably go for the Smoke Grenade. I wasn't excited about Shadow Imbuement because it's mainly for AoE, whereas Poison Imbuement is versatile enough for single targets and groups alike. As for the ultimate ability, the Shadow Clone does what you do, and you needn't worry about it after summoning. You just let it do its thing, but it's not great. Puncture and Barrage aren't my preference, but they're not really the problem here. This is the first build, and we don't have anything to compare it to, so I'm going to give this one a negative 15 out of 7.2 times 10 to the 42nd power. Our moves are Puncture, again, Rapid Fire, which is a dependable secondary ranged attack, Cold Imbuement, which causes your next 2 imbuable attacks to slow enemies who move toward you, Caltrops, which also slow enemies who move toward you, Dash, which helps you move out of the way faster, it has 2 charges, and Rain of Arrows, a devastating ultimate ability that causes 2 massive waves of arrows to hit a small area. Passives prize Frost Imbuement. Here and there, you can see an investment in defense and resource management. Assigning points, I could already tell this build wouldn't be my cup of tea, but I think it was slightly better. Caltrops and Frost Imbuement could clearly work together to keep enemies at a safe distance. I'm not a fan of Dash, and Caltrops aren't as practical as they look on paper. You can see that enemies are barely damaged or slowed by these Caltrops. There's not much time for me to shoot enemies in the AoE either. I don't care for any of the rogue's ultimate techniques, but Rain of Arrows is certainly intuitive. Just an assload of arrows wherever you want them. I didn't immediately die as I began to use this build, so that's already a step up from the first one. Beside Puncture, our moves are Flurry, a series of melee strikes in many directions, Shadow Step, which lets you backstab enemies after teleporting behind them, Dash, Smoke Grenade, and Poison Imbuement. Passives bolster defense, resource management, and Poison Imbuement. The rogue has good passives, you can't go wrong with any of them. Again, there appears to be way too much of an investment in defense. Shadow Step, Dash, and the Smoke Grenade obviously aren't great sources of damage, though I do favor Shadow Step for daring escapes. Flurry is an effective attack around which to develop an entire build. I just have some trepidation about leaving the rogue so close to enemies. I guess that explains the emphasis on mobility. I'm not crazy about this one. Certainly, it's better than the Barrage build, but I think we can leave the Frost Archer on top for now. Beside Puncture, our moves are Rapid Fire, Concealment, Shadow Imbuement, Poison Imbuement, and Poison Trap, an explosive that deals substantial poison damage to enemies caught in the blast. Passives capitalize almost exclusively on making imbuements stronger. Rapid Fire is nothing without the imbuements, and the imbuements aren't much without relevant passives. Puncture is good. Rapid Fire is probably the best skill around which to develop an entire rogue build. Concealment is good for staying out of trouble. By themselves, poison traps are pretty strong. Using poison imbuement simultaneously is a great way to double down on poison damage, whether you're targeting bosses or groups. GameRant suggests using Shadow Imbuement for groups, since enemies inflicted by shadow damage explode upon death, and Poison for single targets, since Poison Imbuement offers substantial DOT. However, using one move for single targets and another move for groups seems too rigid. I want to be able to use my moves in as many contexts as possible. While I'm not crazy about this build, I might have to put it at the top of the roster simply because the poison damage is nothing to scoff at. Beside Puncture, our moves are Flurry, Shadow Step, Poison Trap, Shadow Imbuement, and Death Trap, which is a devastating explosive that deals 60,000 damage to anyone inside the AoE. Passives prioritize general damage, Shadow Imbuement, and Resource Management. As its name suggests, this build is all about leaving shit on the ground and watching it explode. That this build is among the most effective goes without saying. For starters, Shadow Step enables you to get into position to place your traps as quickly as possible. Of course, you can also use this move to escape. The only ostensible reason to favor Shadow Imbuement over Poison Imbuement is that the former is the AoE one. I'm still not crazy about Shadow Imbuement. I could take it or leave it, and I'll probably leave it like 90% of the time. I don't know what this game journalist likes about shadow damage other than the fact that it looks cool. To be fair, it does look cool. Poison traps are wonderful not only because they deal a ton of immediate damage and DOT, but they also knock enemies down and open enemies up to a bunch of free attacks. I guess you can use Flurry and Puncture if you want, but I prefer ranged attacks. The rogue needs to stay far away from everything to have the best shot at survival. By far, this build is my favorite, and I'm placing it at the top of my list. Beside Puncture, our moves are Twisting Blades, a core skill that's little beyond a powerful melee attack, Shadow Step, Dash, Shadow Imbuement, and Death Trap. Passives mainly regard defense, imbuement damage, and resource management. GameRant tends to suggest the same passives again and again. Melee builds require greater mobility for escaping as well as moving into position for an attack, so that's why we have Dash and Shadow Step. Dash and Shadow Step also pull some of their own weight in terms of direct physical damage. Imbuing Twisting Blades with shadow damage makes for pretty solid AoE, especially if you can drop the Death Trap in a pinch. I found myself using the Death Trap and the imbued Twisting Blades the most. I barely used Shadow Step or Dash at all. I hate melee rogues. Creating a melee rogue is like using popsicle sticks to build the Pentagon. I don't understand the incentive to have a melee rogue when ranged rogues enjoy such better defense, along with plenty more opportunities to deal direct damage. Ultimately, I like this one more than the Flurry build because at least this one suggested Death Trap to compensate for its ineffectiveness. Here's the final lineup. The Trap build appears to allow for the highest DPS, and the Barrage build could barely keep me alive, so I think this ranking is fair. Now that I've tried all these game journalist builds, I finally have the nerve to share my own. I thought this experiment might change my personal build, but my experiences have actually reignited my faith in my own build. So here it is, the Aubergine's official rogue build. Our moves are Heartseeker, a ranged attack that increases critical strike chance, Rapid Fire, Shadow Step, Poison Imbuement, Poison Trap, and Rain of Arrows. Passives prioritize damage, defense, and resource management. My build is all about maximizing critical hits and doubling down on poison. This strategy almost makes me feel like a poison mage of sorts. It also finds the balance between abilities that suit single targets and abilities that suit groups. As you can see, I'm digging into my health potions nonstop and I'm getting clobbered by all these skeletons anyway. Still, after reallocating my points several times, I can say confidently that my build either deals the most damage in comparison to other rogue builds, or is among the rogue builds that yield the most damage. Favoring DPS, most ARPG aficionados will likely meet my conclusion. As a discussion about the merits of different rogue builds in Diablo 4, this video isn't likely to provide valuable life lessons of the utmost importance, but I think there are some takeaways to keep in mind. Sitting here and laughing at game journalists because they're bad is fun, but it's beside the point. Any ARPG with a huge team behind it will be too well designed for the average player to come up with an OP build free from all flaws. All builds will have their own strengths and weaknesses, including ball lightning sorcerers. Not only do many of us have different opinions about which strategies are most effective, but we all enjoy different playstyles. The game journalist from whom I stole these builds appears to love melee rogues as much as I despise them. I feel that many of us, especially the most casual gamers, turn to popular builds out of helplessness. But an important thing to remember is that you'll probably research a few builds and ultimately conclude that your idea was better anyway. When in doubt, you can depend on your own decisions. I wouldn't use any of these builds competitively, but there were things I liked about them. For instance, I think Puncture is an excellent basic skill. I don't think it's as good as Heartseeker, but I was surprised by how effective and dependable it was. Looking at these builds has allowed me to think more creatively about different strategies. Though the skill tree encourages players to use only one move from each type, many of these builds incorporate multiple moves of the same type. What good is Monumental DPS if a single demon can vaporize you by looking at you funny? Damage builds are fun, but a good Diablo strategy finds a sweet spot between defense and damage. If you fail to enter a dungeon with a top-notch strategy, no amount of skill will compensate for your character's inherent weaknesses. If you want a good rogue build, be a druid, turn into a bear, and you won't be disappointed. Playing Diablo for weeks on end has been fun, but I think I may soon return to janky and beautifully broken Titan Quest. Don't kill the same thing all the time, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.